The British public should realise that Muslim scapegoats today, much like the Jewish, Irish or black scapegoats used by demagogues yesterday, are not their enemies. On Thursday, Michael Gove, the UK Secretary for State for Levelling Up Houses and Communities, revealed a new definition of extremism, despite criticisms from rights groups, senior Tory party members, Church of England leaders and even his own legal advisors. What caught my eye in particular, prior to the release of the government's new definition, was the 3 former Home Secretaries who'd signed the letter warning against the politicising of anti-extremism, not least because they have all been at one point defendants in a case that I brought against the government. In 2015, I was defamed as a so-called extremist in a 10 Downing Street press release, over which I took the government to court. As well as a case for libel, our legal challenge also included a public law case, arguing that the government has been acting unlawfully in its measures to counter so-called extremism, for which we currently await our day at the European Court of Human Rights. One of the many lessons I learned throughout this whole ordeal was just how meaningless extremism is. Indeed, at the High Court, our barrister, Paul Bowen KC, masterfully laid out before the judge a list of people who would be deemed extremist according to the government today, from Aristotle to Voltaire to Jesus Christ himself. That is why, before finally apologising for the libelous press release in 2021, the government's 5-year-long defence was not that I am in fact an extremist, but the defence of honest opinion. That extremism itself is a subjective value judgment, not based on anything concrete and hence not liable to objective truth and falsehood. That is probably why the government's legal advisors have not been very happy with Gove's maverick attitude towards throwing around the label. Unlike popular political and social discourse, people who transact in the tedium of precision and facts, jurists, academics and so on, look past the cartoon villains used to sell counter-extremism policies and convince citizens to partner with their hard-won rights. The problem is that defamation is a millionaire sport, and we don't have a functioning enough mainstream press to hold demagogues to account, let alone adequately convey the consensus among academic researchers of all empirically determined causes of terrorism and political violence. Spoiler alert, ideology isn't one of them. It's incidental, not causative. As a result, it's easy for us citizens to get swept up in the national security fervour and acquiesce into giving the political classes more and more arbitrary powers to restrict our activities. But remember this, extremism is not about terrorists or murderers or other bogeymen used to sell a policy. You see, when someone carries out an actual act of terrorism or political violence, or when someone murders someone or destroys public property, or even engages in hate speech, they are not prosecuted under any extremism or even anti-terrorism legislation. They are prosecuted normally under existing, sometimes centuries-old legislation. That is why the likes of even the government's appointed independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Max Hill KC, suggested that terrorism laws ought to be scrapped. So why are we still talking about it? I asked one of our legal counsels how something so vacuous and toxic as a failed prevent policy and the extremism discourse it's built upon had gotten so far. The veteran in taking governments to court taught me a valuable lesson. Governments don't tend to do things based on evidence or empirical research. They do things to be seen to be doing things. This government has made it clear that it's using Muslims as a political football in a race to the bottom to appeal to the worst xenophobic sentiments and racist myths using dog whistle politics. Gove is no stranger to this tactic, considering his role in what many call the Trojan hoax scandal that dragged Britain's social cohesion back decades while simultaneously destroying the otherwise outstanding educational prospects of generations of inner-city young Birmingham children. It's no coincidence that a former party leader, Liz Truss, has been seen hobnobbing with the infamous Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former advisor, nodding along approvingly as he hails the likes of Tommy Robinson as a hero and bewails the imaginary no-go zones across Britain run by Muslims, prompting a reaction from her reminiscent of the lettuce that outlasted her premiership. But there is a more sinister dimension to today's events that was revealed during our legal challenge. During our legal challenge, we discovered a previously secretive department within the Home Office, eerily called Extremism Analysis Unit, that employs advanced digital tools to monitor citizens' public and social media lives whilst making determinations on who is and is not an extremist. Seeing as the definition of extremism they were using was vocal or active opposition to British values, this presented a chilling echo of McCarthyism in 21st century Britain, with a committee effectively monitoring un-British activities. We made thousands of pages of documents available to the public, and since then, journalists, academic, and NGOs have been able to push back against this likely breach of our rights to privacy and freedom of thought. However, the rabbit hole went deeper. We also uncovered that this shady unit was regularly receiving and uncritically reproducing briefings from none other than members of the Henry Jackson Society, a controversial neoconservative think tank. That's right, a group whose associate director, Douglas Murray, appealed to Dutch lawmakers in 2006 that conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder across the board, whose foreign funders and associates include a veritable who's who of anti-Muslim hatred, was telling this shady government department which Muslims are extremists and therefore should have their rights curtailed under the Toxic Prevent program. And they were listening. It might be worth mentioning that Michael Gove has served as one of the Henry Jackson Society's directors in the past. I've always said that Muslims are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to British civil liberties. Many of us warned at the start of this anti-extremism business that if authorities get the taste of arbitrarily restricting lawful speech, thought and behaviour they don't like, it's only a matter of time before that circle of inexpressible opinion becomes wider and wider. I hate to say I told you so, but since then, we've seen the tentacles of this discourse apply to climate change activism, animal rights demonstrators, anti-fracking demonstrators, and now of course Palestinian rights marchers. Racist dog whistle tactics may work in the short term, but at the cost of long-term harm to civil society at large. Not to mention beyond our borders, as the sordid anti-extremism industry has been seen exported to the likes of China and India that are terrorizing their own Muslim populations right now. Not only is our resistance to so-called anti-extremism discourse good for all of our civil liberties, but researchers routinely warn us that the presence of so-called non-violent extremism also makes us safer. However much we dislike deplorable opinions, we are all better off when they stay as speech and opinions that can be openly discussed, argued and rebutted. History shows us that if you want to reduce the likelihood of some overzealous fanatics turning to violence, you need to give them a non-violent outlet. It is precisely when so-called radical or extreme groups experience state suppression that some voices from within them succeed in convincing people to choose the bullet over the ballot box. In other words, if you want to stop violence, the worst thing you can do is ban non-violence. The cure to bad speech is more speech, not less. It is heartening that there has been so much condemnation and rebuke of the likes of Michael Gove and his neocon chums trying to take us down this dark path. Those whom the dog whistles appeal to would do well to realize that the Muslim scapegoats used to distract them today are not their enemies, much like the Jewish, Irish or black scapegoats used by demagogues yesterday. Muslims, with all of our quirks, are part and parcel of the British landscape now, and our interests align with the interests of the vast majority. The sooner we all realize that, the better.